I do not specialize really in any particular technique or style, and I tend to work more and more with materials which are not always associated with the medium of mosaic. I never represent nature, even though I'm fascinated with those who achieve wonders on that path. I guess I'm personally driven by contemporary culture and existential notions that keep coming back to me, such as mankind versus nature, permanence and impermanence, the future and our attitude to it, man's dreams and beliefs, man's achievements and failures. Mankind is what drives me in everything I do. Looking back at my work, it seems to always evolve first around ideas rather than matter. And this has led me to work with very versatile materials, ranging from 3D moving images to glow-in-the-dark materials, holograms, gold, recycled metal, plastic, or wooden objects. And always in search to play with light, to create shadows, which I also like to call ghost matter. When it comes to mosaic, I'm completely self-taught, and where I can say I became an absolute master at something was at making many mistakes along the way and for many years. But I realize now that my lack of knowledge and training, as well as my lonely and unguided journey with a medium, shaped the artist I am now. And if I had to do the same journey all over again, I would do it the same way, because I found my way. It is only by looking at my body of work that I was able to see a mirror reflection of myself, and that taught me more about myself as an artist than anything else. Looking back at my steps, it would seem that my path has had many twists and turns. Some artists express themselves by delving deeper down a chosen path, but my intuition has led me to touch more briefly on a variety of paths. My creative journey has been quite a meandering one, really, going from large-scale urban art projections to short film making, to glow-in-the-dark painting for rave clubs, and mosaic. And within mosaic itself, you can find me on the kinetic exploration, on the gold exploration, and on what I call the idea of the moment. And that alone can take me on many different directions, technically and material-wise. Today I would like to take you down that meandering journey, but only posing at those twists and turns which were the most formative for me as an artist. The urban projection known as the Glow Project being one of them, and my various twists and turns with mosaic. This is my slice of a journey, one among many. In 2001, I decided it was a great time for me to follow my intuition, and that meant quitting my job and follow the creative path I should have followed a long time ago. I finally left France and decided to move back to the UK. I had discovered mosaic 3 years previously, and I knew from day one, that it was a medium I had to pursue. Actually, I was hooked. I moved to the fabulous city of Brighton and found an accommodation where I could use the cellar as my workshop. That was luxury for me. The cellar was tiny, and even though there wasn't any window or ventilation, I was the happiest person can be. It was so exciting. On the mosaic front, I had everything to learn. It is one thing to make mosaic in between jobs, and it is something else to make a living out of it. And especially when you have no clue about it all, no example to guide you, and basically no plan at all. At the time, I thought that the best way for me would be to create small pieces, easy to make and affordable to buy, and that implied to work fast and produce lots of work. After spending a year and a half creating endless small pieces, I started to feel the disenchantment creeping in. My work was being sold for a fraction of the price I would have hoped for. The prices I got for my work certainly did not justify the amount of time I was spending on them. I was far too slow, and I was far too much paying attention to details. I hated the feeling of the clock behind my back, and in all honesty, I just didn't enjoy anymore creating small pieces which had only the function of being pretty. At the same time, the lack of direction, the lack of light and space, and the lack of human relationships started to take a toll on me. I remember one day going outside. I opened the door and breathed deeply some fresh air. I needed to see the light and have a fag. And really, like in a flash, I saw my street in a very different light. The street was deserted and there was not a soul in town. I could see only closed doors, and I realized I knew almost no one. I looked at the walls of the long row of houses in front of me, and suddenly I saw the perfect canvas, a canvas to project on the lives of 1,000 faces. The street was called Kensington Place in Brighton. The idea was to bring the neighbors together and give the opportunity to all of us to share amongst each other and passers-by our most treasured memories through the use of photographs. I called the project the Glow Project. The response I got from the residents was overwhelming. Sorry to say, but this is when I dropped Mosaic and started packing my boxes to leave them in the cellar, only to return to them 4 years later, knowing a little bit more about myself and the creative in me. Just after the event, I decided to contact a large-scale projection company called ETC to see if my project would resonate with them. Much to my surprise, they were really interested and offered to fund and bring on board their amazing technology and expertise on my next project. I was in very good hands, as you can see. Over the course of the next year, I organized 2 more Glow Project events, this time with ETC as partners. My next event took place on the Royal Pavilion in Brighton. But this time, instead of exploring people's memories, I chose to explore the forgotten memories of old photos, paintings, drawings, and all sorts of objects from inside the Royal Pavilion. A bit of water. My third event took place at Adelaide Crescent. The theme here was going back to what I did in Kensington Place, but this time on a larger canvas and involving a bigger community. This is a famous crescent in Brighton, next to the sea. I chose it because it had perfect white, even facades, which was ideal for projecting images onto. The real beauty of this choice came from the diversity and energy of the Adelaide Crescent community. Brighton is fantastic for that. I could write a whole book about my experiencing and organizing the Adelaide Crescent event. For example, the first door I knocked on was opened by a very old, 2-meter tall, frail man. He welcomed me with a kind face, and all I could see behind him was rows and rows and rows of sympathy cards. It was obvious he had very recently lost somebody very dear to him. After I explained to him the project and showed him pictures of my last event, he told me with no hesitation that he was very much looking forward to it, so he could be somehow reunited with his wife, with whom he had lived almost 70 years. He was already planning on inviting all his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to the event. He had something to look forward to. His images were fascinating and very moving. The anecdotes of this kind are endless. On the night of the projection on Adelaide Crescent, the temperature outside was around 0 degrees and it was raining. Seemingly unfazed by the weather, the residents and the passers-by were mesmerized and hypnotized by the unfolding projections in front of them. While the event was happening, I heard from some people that they felt they were in front of their own photo album. And someone added that he felt he was in front of the photo album of humanity. For one evening, they were us and we were them. For me, the Glow Project feels like a giant mosaic. In Mosaic, each individual tile is singular, beautiful, and unique, and could even stand on its own. But when you orchestrate a tile among many others, the tile becomes part of a much larger story, which becomes an idea. Similarly, the Glow Project consisted of individual slices of life, each one beautiful and unique in their own right. But once woven together into the Glow Project presentation, they became part of a much larger story that took on a whole new meaning. It was just a matter of time before my hands started to itch, and I felt like I had to explore again my relationship with matter. And before I knew it, my path was meandering back into the world of Mosaic. My Glow Project journey was a spiritual journey and a journey about humanity. A very simple but deep journey, a journey that moved me profoundly. It is therefore no wonder that in my re-entry into the world of Mosaic, I found myself unconsciously gravitating towards the urge to express ideas and the need to always have a meaning attached to my work, and with a central theme of humanity always under the surface of what I do. Because Mosaic is a medium that holds so much gravity and permanence, it was an absolute conundrum for me trying to express such abstract ideas through the medium of Mosaic. I spent a few years in the corridors of doubt. During all this time, I was producing work, but I knew I wasn't there yet. I felt like a small little boat in a huge ocean of wonders. I tried to keep myself as far away as possible from studying the work of other artists. I just didn't want to be influenced too much. It was a way for me to find myself, to find my own way in this gigantic labyrinth of technique, of style and possibilities. I had to do it on my own. It was only after a few years that I started to agree with what I was creating. It was only at this point that I started to feel anchored enough to explore and learn through looking at the work of others. This was the way that worked for me, but I can see how it can work the other way around for others. Now it's coming. How do you express with Mosaic the last second before you die? This is a piece I did in 2009, which I titled In Between the Lines. It was a milestone piece for me because for the first time, I completely agreed with something I had made and something that was that abstract. For me, this piece is portraying what you see the last second before you die. There are two spirals pulling the viewer to the unknown. The white spiral represents life with its architectures and rhythms, expressed here with some white ceramic and small t. The blue spiral is the celestial or spiritual world and is expressed by the blue round iridized tiles. The bubble images that you see here are the flashes that an individual might see and might experience as they pass over to the unknown. I use sentimental objects from my past, broken and mended ceramic, holograms, 3D moving images to express speed and motion. It is a piece that expresses a lot of abstract ideas in a medium that is weighed down by gravity and permanence. Not an easy task, and yet, many years down the line, I still agree with it. If I had to express this idea again today, I might do it somehow differently, but it still echoes very much with me today. As I said earlier, Mosaic is a well of possibilities, and I can't help myself to be pulled in several directions, but it seems that there are two directions that I keep coming back. The gold direction and the kinetic direction. As for gold, let me just say that my fascination with gold has nothing to do with the element of value or status that is attached to it. When I'm in front of gold, I feel like a child in a state of total contemplation. It takes me to a place that no other matter can do. Gold is a noble metal. This means it won't oxidize, rust, corrode, or tarnish. No single acid or amount of heat can dissolve or destroy gold. I love the idea that the ring on your finger could have been a Roman coin 2,000 years ago. Gold is the most malleable metal. A single gram can be flattened to make a sheet of 1 square meter of gold leaf, and also be turned into thread and used in embroidery. It has been discovered that gold plays a role in both the health and the maintenance of the joints in all our bodies. It also acts as a key element in the transmission of electrical signal throughout our body. Gold is in all of us. To be precise, there is 0.2 gram of gold in an adult human, and just that notion fascinates me. In the first part of the Middle Ages, in the first part of the Middle Ages, perspective had not been invented yet, and art looked therefore flat and two-dimensional. But the use of gold in religious art was a way for the artist to surpass the flatness and the two-dimensionality and create a divine dimension. They were creating a dimension where time and space did not exist. This is, in a way, what I was trying to recreate with The Ripples Must Be Endless. I'm fascinated by sequences and repetitions. They help me to communicate. What I was trying to portray with this work was the melody coming from the universe. Each gold tile became a note on the score of that melody. I created this piece to be seen as much from afar as from very close. That will also explain my recurring obsessions with details. When I create a work, I can never bring myself to create an object only of beauty, nor something that is just abstract. I have to create something that means something, at least to myself. This is why I always have to give titles to my work. Sometimes the title comes before I have even fully completed the visualization of the work. Other times the title and the meaning is unclear to me during the making process. But somehow I know that I have to follow my intuition until it all reveals itself at the end, because it always reveals itself at the end, to me at least. The other recurring theme in my work is kinetic work. There are two ways I create motion in my work, either by using light, which generates shadows in motion or not, or with lenticulars, which are also called 3D moving images. But first, let's look at shadows. To create kinetic work involving light, you need three elements: light, 3D matter, and the resulting shadows. I absolutely love shadows. I call them ghost matter, because they leave such a dynamic and pronounced print on the work, even if they are not really there physically. But still, they are so alive. They can gradually dance if the light source involves natural light, or be frozen if there is only an artificial light. But when the light source involves a natural light, the shadow reacts like a sundial throughout the day. When you introduce natural light, you create, in your work, you introduce a wild card, because the way the work looks like cannot be controlled, and that's the beauty of it. The advantage as well with that kind of work is that you can decide to take control of the light source, and render the effect exactly the way you want it. So for the artist, it's a win-win situation. Shadows are also a marriage made in heaven when it comes to interact with the color white. This color, often associated, for example, to purity, peace, light, or death, keeps coming back to my work. It bears and contracts with shadows like no other color. The next image is a 3D computer rendered model of a work in progress. This work is just another iteration of my white on white and shadows research theme put together. The other way I create motion in my work is through the use of lenticulars. You probably all have had a lenticular at some point in your hands. They are those flipping images that you find as postcards or bookmark. They can depict animations of all sorts, or just create the illusions of depth. I have been collecting lenticulars for 20 years, and I've always known I would do something with them one day. It is always very funny to look at a viewer from behind, because generally it starts with the head looking closer, and then move on the right, move on the left, go back again, and then they stop, they stand back, and they look a little bit confused, but also amused. This material is incredibly vibrant and holds an endless palette of colors. Within one little frame of lenticular, you can find so many colors. Again. So many colors. Within one frame of lenticular, you can see the colors disappear and depending on the position of the viewer. For me, this is a lot of fun to create with. Moving away from the kinetic theme, I would like to discuss 2 other works with you and talk about the process of making them. This is the Great Deceit. If the title is not enough with this work, I wanted to create a feeling of discomfort, a piece that emanates austerity. It is quite a large piece, 1.1 square meter, and given its size, I was very concerned about the weight of the piece, because it had to look like a concrete slab. But after spending a lot of time thinking about it, I realized that the best solution would be to recreate the concrete effect on wood using a thin layer of jesmonite, which is a polyplaster. For those who haven't come across it before, jesmonite is a lightweight composite material which is extremely versatile, and that you work like plaster or cement, but which is stronger and more water resistant. It is used widely in sculpting and construction. It accepts colored pigments and metal powder, increasing even more its versatility. The slab in the end weighed probably 10 times less than it looks. The floating middle part was made using Hessian fabric dipped into PVA and water. The structure was then reinforced using jesmonite mixed with black pigment to obtain a dark gray color. With this work, like in many of my work, I used negative spaces extensively to highlight the essential. Negative spaces are very important to me. They fill me up with clarity. They allow my tiles and components to exist with force and independence. To create my binary message in the center, I use glazed ceramic, which I cut into strips and zeros, which I then apply to my floating structure using cement. The white lines that you see could look like a random sequence. Oh no, go back. Like a random sequence. But it is in fact a binary language made of zeros and ones, which once translated reveals its message. Multiverse. The other work I wanted to talk to you about is Multiverse. Multiverse is made of 2 distinct panels made of wood and superimposed on top of each other. The 3D foreground panel has been laser cut. I wanted to create a piece that would pull the viewer in with a spectacular explosion of colors in the background, and superimposed on top of it a 3D structure representing a motherboard circuit. Each tile in the explosion of colors in the background had to be individually shaped by hand and finished off using a torus glass cutting saw. I used around 50 different shades of smalty, gold and glow-in-the-dark tiles to recreate the explosion. The tiles had to be tapered so that they would follow very carefully the many lines I had traced on my board in order to create the perfect perspective for them. They had to start very tiny at the center and increase in width very gradually towards the outer frame. The other difficulty was the many obstacles that my lines met along the way. This computer maze presented crazy angles by the bucket, so the sculpting and polishing of each tile took far longer than I could have ever imagined. The work took a good part of 1 year to make. Gold being a conductor of current in computers, it made sense to me to use gold on my 3D maze to write with it my own computing language sequences. I deliberately incorporated some glow-in-the-dark tiles into my explosion so that my work can take on a completely different perspective at night and live a double life. The 3D maze also features Legos, clockwork parts, polymer clay molding, and white stained glass circles to catch light even further and give to the maze as much importance visually as the overpowering explosive background. The then expressed with a big bang and the now expressed with my computer maze hopefully exist on equal ground. Once again here, the use of my negative spaces helped me to create more depth between all the different layers. No. Different layers, and allow my overall design to breathe peacefully in its own dimension. Before I conclude my presentation, I wanted to touch on a few commissions that I have done over the years. To be offered a commission is always quite an exciting moment for an artist, but past this moment, the worries of deadlines, cost overruns, and relying on other subcontractors can quickly wipe out any lingering excitement and fill you with dread. This is a fountain mosaic feature I did for an apartment complex in Limehouse in London, which was called the Mosaic, appropriate. I was commissioned to design and create a mosaic feature for the fountain and 2 large concrete benches in the center of the square, replacing an existing mosaic which had seen better days. What made this project particularly difficult was the fact that the subcontractors, who was responsible for taking down the existing mosaic and re-rendering the surfaces, used the wrong products and didn't follow the right curing time for the job. And the cement was already starting to come off when we were about to install. When the subcontractor did get around to finishing the job correctly, we were already in the premise of winter, and the project was installed under gazebos, rain, and strong wind. I would like to thank the fabulous team who worked on this project with me, Monica Piovezzana, Julia Vrogrig, and Doina Avram. This is a mosaic feature I did for an eco garden in Bermondsey in London. The columns were designed and created by an architect firm, and on my side, I was commissioned to create the mosaic to dress up the columns. Being an eco garden, the design had to reflect the place and embrace the nature around. The themes were flow, grow, fly, and breathe. Okay, thanks. These are 3 murals I created for a private home in France. It consisted of 2 circles of 1 meter diameter each and a twirling feature, which was around 2.5 meter long. It was an ideal commission in the sense that I had a complete carte blanche for the design and the materials to use. This is Elemental. This is a mural I did for the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists recently. After a very simple brief from, about their institution, artists were invited to submit their designs. I decided to submit a design which for me symbolized perfectly the institution. It had to be a large-scale shaped circle or a wheel. The circle symbolizes life at a microscopic scale with the atom, the human scale with the embryo, and the macroscopic scale with the planets, the sun, and the universe. Here I use the Big Bang, source of all lives, and the pregnancy will card, which is used extensively by these professions, to illustrate my idea. Elemental measures 1.5 meter in diameter. I use gold circle tiles in the center to create an explosion of light, and I use for the rest of the piece opaque and iridized stained glass and dichroic fused glass. I would like to finish by touching again on how it all started and conclude on it. 16 years ago, I was grafting my first large mosaic piece. The piece had completely disappeared under a thick layer of black grout when some friends knocked on the door. Very happily, they offered to help me remove the grout and clean the piece. What transformed me was seeing their genuine amazement as the piece revealed itself. That was my eureka moment. Since then, the construction of the large with a reunion of the small has been a subconscious journey in everything I've done, whether with mosaic or with another medium. The underlying drive of all of this has been to spark that same amazement I saw that day on the faces of my friends. It is that which keeps me going. It is that which makes me want to surpass myself further. That's it.